All right, so this is what we came up with yesterday. Um, and just to kind of recap, I know you were all here, but I'm going to be creating my own version of Space Invaders. After coming up with the basic idea, I came up with a list of things that I would need to basically identify and find inspiration for, like the spaceship of the main character, any aliens or alien ships that will be coming down at me and I have to fight against, any backgrounds that are space related. And from all of that, I'd come up with some sort of color scheme. And had to decide on the style, which would be flat illustration in this case. So once I got that list of things that I need to focus on, I could then go out and search for the different pieces that are going to be making up my mood board so I can develop the look and feel for my overall project. And one of the reasons I bring that up again is that once you have your idea and your mood board, that kind of guides everything else. So even making the rule book, we want to make sure that it fits the overall theme and the look and feel of the project that we're working on. So what I'm going to do is take all of this stuff in the rules and instructions part that I wrote out yesterday, and I'm actually going to take those and put them into a more structured order and also write them out in a way that would make sense to somebody who's coming into this game fresh. I want to make sure I'm using words that are, straightforward and easy to understand. There's no need to talk about clones or Y values or spawning or costumes or anything like that, because those are things that we know and those are things that we need to understand for when it comes to the actual development and the coding part of the process. So basically, I'm going to take this and kind of break it down and come in with a certain amount of, you know, not necessarily dumb it down, but I'm going to simplify it and also add as many different details and clarification elements as I can so that it can be a rule book that any user coming in would be able to use and understand. So I'm going to keep this document open, but I'm going to just come over here to a totally blank presentation. Um, I'm going to give it a name. I'll just call it, I'll come up with the official name of my game later, but Space Invaders Rulebook. And so we'll get started. We have a blank slide here. We're going to treat this as though we're putting a book together. And like I said, you can do this either in slides, you can create your own Google Doc. If you have other software that can do some page layout, certainly do it in that as well. I figured this would be something that just about everybody would have access to and would make it easy. If you just do it in a document, you have some limitations as far as your layout and formatting and all that stuff goes. So I figured this would allow us to have some more options. And I'm going to just do a quick first draft of this right now. I'm not going to spend the time to get it looking 100% perfect, just to kind of get you started. So first of all, I'm going to change my background. I want to make sure that the whole thing fits the entire look and feel of our game. So I'm going to choose an image, and I actually, I downloaded an image yesterday when I was doing my mood board. So I'm going to use something like this. Give it a chance to load. Looks a little funny, so I might go back in, find something else. So just do like illustrated space. Let's see what happens. Okay, so we got quite a few. Some of these obviously are not going to fit with the overall look and feel. Something that's certainly illustrated, but it's more of a 3D rendering. That's not quite what I want to do. This one almost would work. I want to go a little more generic than that, though. So just whatever you find, maybe even something from your mood board would make a lot of sense for it. So as I'm scrolling through, none of those are quite doing it for me. So I'm just going to pick one of these kind of generic ones, maybe something like this one. I'm going to insert it right in there. And that looks a little better. Again, not perfect. This is just for demonstration purposes. Now to make all my text look good, I'm going to add a rectangle and I'm going to kind of draw it out. I might even just do it kind of across the whole thing here. I'm going to change the color to something else. Might make it black, but somewhat transparent, somewhere in there. And I'm going to shift it to the back. So all my text is going to be in front. And so I'm going to just call this title of the game, Space Invaders. I'm going to make it bold and use a white or something like that. And the official book, something like that. And of course I can move stuff around too. And for this particular one too, I might shift it up because I want to keep my my astronaut right there. Nothing too crazy, just something to make it look good. Get rid of that border around the outside too. And then we'll get started. We'll create a new slide. And what I'm going to do is take this, actually, copy and paste. I'm going to move it down. Give myself some room to play with here. Oops. Something like that. And make sure it's in the back. Okay. So where do we start? Well, go back to your game development workflow document, your kind of idea holder. And, we look at all the things we need to add. Well, first, we have our idea, and it's a good idea to have one of your first slides be an introduction. Right at the beginning of most rule books for games, it kind of gives an overview of what the game's going to be, kind of sets the tone, and it gives a little bit of the story behind what the game is all about. So let's start there. So make this a heading, change the color to white, make it bold. And so we might say something like built off. Maybe just start with the introduction, actually. Introduction. Do a header there. There we go. And then we'll say a little something about the game. So based on the classic video game Space Invaders, maybe like this. It's a title, so make it italic. Space Invaders. This game has been updated with new elements and a new look to make your game experience more enjoyable. Some sort of like almost like marketing language in there, just something to give people a sense of what the game's about. I mean, most people are familiar with Space Invaders. It is classic. So by invoking that connection, it makes the audience kind of understand where you're coming from, maybe even a little bit of how the game works, and it gives them an idea of whether or not they'll enjoy it or not. So we start off with a quick introduction, and then maybe we'll even include another one that is the goal. And the goal of the game would be your mission, in this case, is to save your world from an invading armada of alien ships. Just kind of give them a sense of what the whole point is. It's that so what of your game. And then we'll move on to our next slide. So I'm going to just duplicate this one, and we're going to say how to play. And so here's where we'll really spend a lot of time going back and forth, because we're into this section here about the rules and instructions. And right now it's a lot of basic phrases and, more like just notes about how things are going to work in your own mind. And the thing is you don't necessarily have the ability to explain to each individual player what's going on, what's expected. So what you need to do is take your thoughts and put them into a more concrete format so that you can uh, really explain what is intended in a very clear way and a very consistent way too. So instead of just saying spaceship controlled by left and right arrows, you can break it down into, maybe we'll do a header for the player. Let's see, maybe the player's spaceship is controlled using or controlled by the left and right arrow keys on your keyboard. I can type. Now, that seems like it should be enough. It should be pretty obvious that, we mean that left and right means if you press left, you go left. If you press right, you go right. Now, that should be obvious, but there's no way to fully understand and know who your audience is and how computer savvy they are. This could be one of their first computer games and they're still trying to figure out how things work. So you want to break it down and be as clear as possible, even if it seems like you're making it like, way too simple. You want to make sure that you're essentially, excuse the term, but idiot proofing your project. You want to make sure that whatever you create is something that is accessible to anyone, no matter how much of a novice they are at being on computers. So I would expand this to say, just to be 100% clear, that press the left arrow key to move the player's spaceship to the left, press the right arrow key to move the player's spaceship to the right. And it may seem redundant and it may seem a little tedious to do it that way, but it makes sense to over explain without being like, too much in the weeds and getting it like too complicated. But you want to be clear. So there's a balance to be found there, between being clear and being someone who over explains everything. So a little bit of repetition is okay, as long as it's clarifying repetition, not just repeating for the sake of repeating. So we have control of the spaceship, which is right here. And so the next thing that has to do with the player is how to fire the laser. So we'll go over and we'll say maybe the spaceship is equipped with a laser blaster, whatever you want to call it. You can give it its own name. It's equipped with a laser blaster that that is controlled, maybe, by the spacebar. If you press the spacebar once, the laser will fire. Once, if you hold down the spacebar, the laser will fire repeatedly or continuously. Let's put that word. Okay. So now, just on this one page, we know how to play. You move the player around with left and right arrows, and you press the space bar to fire. So it becomes very clear how this game is meant to be played. So let's go back. Next, we got to talk about our adversaries. And it's going to kind of cover this sort of thing right here, which is who are we fighting against and how do they behave? What can we expect as players going into this for the first time, what are we going to expect from how the game's going to work? So I'm going to create a new slide, or that's duplicate, and it's still under how to play. It's under that main category, but we're going to call it the aliens. And so the first thing we want to show is what is it about the aliens that we will see first. And so we'll say at the beginning of the game, there will be, or maybe just not there will be, a row of 5 alien ships will be lined up at the top of the screen. Okay, that makes sense. The next thing down is they're going to gradually move down every 2 seconds. Okay, so we will say every 2 seconds, the row of alien ships move down the screen and get closer, to the surface. So even using some terms that represent the world that you're working with. So if this is a space theme, you talk about things like ships and surfaces and asteroids and other things that kind of pull that player into the environment that you're creating. So even with the rule book, it's a great place to insert some of that terminology, some of that imagery, anything that you can do to just kind of support the overall look and feel and theme of the entire project. Because after all, the rule book is an integral part of the game, and so it needs to make sense as far as this game is concerned. So after we've established that there is a series of aliens at the top and they're going to be coming down the screen, maybe every, I don't know how many seconds. I think I said over here that every 5 seconds or so, there'd be a new row of aliens. So this is something that can change after the development actually happens. I can change in my rule book how many seconds of wait it is, or however I need to explain it to actually reflect what the coding and what that trial and error and playtesting brings out. So I'll just start here with what I put in my initial notes. Every 5 seconds, a new row of alien ships appears at the top of the screen and will continuously, approach the surface, threatening your very existence. Why not? Adds a little bit of drama and story to the whole thing. So we look back over here. We could get through some of this whole stuff with, what happens. But again, using the terms like spawn and clone and all of that sort of thing doesn't really make sense to your average user. It's more for developer purposes. So we don't necessarily need to include all the technical stuff. But it does make sense to include this part here so that we know that, basically how the game is played and what the objectives are. So we've introduced our player and the aliens, and now we're going to change that up a little bit. We're going to change it to, how to, I don't know, how to fight, or even just something dramatic like defend yourself. Sounds good. So once the game begins, the player should begin firing the laser at the alien ships And this might make sense to even repeat yourself a little bit by pressing the space bar. And that would, just reiterate how the game is played. It adds some clarification. So once the game begins, this is what you do. Let's see, we'd say it takes 2 hits to destroy an alien ship. And I think that, that kind of clarifies that just a little bit. We don't need to really go into too much detail about that. Maybe you will know you've hit an alien because the ship will show damage after the first hit. I mean, that's a little repetitive, saying hit twice. You'll know you've hit after the first impact, maybe. If I can spell. There we go. So that kind of sums up, how the game is played. But then there's, that other element that we've introduced in here, which is the asteroids. I'm going to skip the, how do you know if you've won or lost, part until after. It makes sense to put that there, just as a stream of consciousness. But when we're actually looking at how the game is going to be played and explaining it to people, we got to tell them what some of the advantages are as well. So I'm going to create a new heading here called asteroids. I'll say during the game, during the course of the battle, maybe, asteroids will travel across the sky in random directions. Maybe put something in like when you shoot and hit an asteroid, it will explode. And what would a good word be here? It'll cause damage. It will, I guess, cause is a good enough word for now. It'll cause damage to all alien ships within its range. We don't need to say, and of course I bumped the apostrophe there. We don't need to say that whole, within 50 pixels or within 100 pixels, because most people don't know what pixels really mean, at least as far as a measurement device. So just saying within its, blast radius, even, that's a good space term, blast radius. And so that just introduces that level of complexity to the game and how that works. We don't need to say, oh, they're going to be coming in and they're spinning. They're going to come from different X and Y values and travel across from left to right or right to left. You don't need to necessarily do any of that stuff in the rule book. You just want to say they're going to be traveling across the sky, and if you shoot one, it blows up. You don't need to say anything about how it will, it's not going to damage anything if it just like flies by and physically comes in touch with it. It's going to be something where it's only if it explodes. You just need to explain that much, that when it explodes, it's going to cause damage. Then we're going to create a new slide, and instead of how to play, it's how do you win? Because that's obviously what we're all here trying to do, is win this game. So to win, we're going to refer back to our notes here. So to win, you successfully killed 50 aliens. Okay, which should be all the ones that will come out in the level. So to win, so I might say to successfully complete your mission. again, using the same terminology that will help illustrate the entire feel. To successfully complete your mission, you have to kill all 50 aliens that are threatening your planet. And then another sentence in there to just say, if any of the aliens, if the alien ships is able to land on the surface, are able, sorry about that, are able to land on the surface, the game is over. And that should be enough. And so when we think back here is we've covered all of our bases. We've talked about, how to control the players. What do the aliens do? What the asteroids do, and how do you win and how do you lose? And so this covers all of those different aspects of the game that we talked about weeks ago, of making sure that we know who the players are, know how to win, what any advantages or disadvantages there are, the overall rules. We might even include something up here, even just a little note. This is a single player game for ages 5 and up. You can put that in there somewhere too. I'm sure that I'm going to be having my kids play test this, and I think it's going to be fine for them to be able to use the left and mouse arrow in the space bar. My youngest, who's going to be 5 on Friday, I'm not sure if she's coordinated enough or has experience enough using a keyboard to really understand how to play. But I know my sons, who are 7 and 10, can certainly do that without any problem. So, I think probably 5 is like a good minimum age in there. But this also gives some expectations for what you will be keeping in mind for your game. And it lets the players know that, okay, it's not a multiplayer game. That's always important. It's not 2-player even, where you take turns, at least by design. You can always alternate, of course. But and there's an age range. I'm not going to give this to a 3-year-old to try and play. It's just not going to work. So at this point, you have all your rules out here, and you'd start going in and making some changes to formatting. I noticed that my my text isn't centered in there like I think it should be. It's awfully close to the top on most of these. This one's not as bad as far as my margins go. But you can go in and present, and it will give you a chance to go through it and see what the user's experience would be. And most people might not even notice, but to me it bothers me that my margins and everything are off the way they are. So I would want to do something about that. But again, this is just a first draft. Make sure that what you turn in actually is laid out, whether you have different colors. So maybe like these, draw from another color in your color palette for your entire game. So maybe it was a nice light blue or something like that. It just doesn't stand out too well, but you get the idea. You pick some color that sticks out or as part of the overall look and feel. Might even choose something that's a little bit more on yellow. Whatever you decide to do that fits your overall look and feel. Remember, it has to support what it is that you are creating as your overall look and feel. So when you're developing these, always refer back to your main document. This is what we use to kind of set up our overall plan, and we need to stick to that plan. Of course, as you're developing, things change, especially things like, how often, a new row is spawned or how quickly they move. Maybe the radius of 50 to 100 pixels is not quite right. It's not going to do the trick. So that stuff gets adjusted. And so as you're working on the development process, you're going to have to keep going back to your rule book to make sure that it is still accurate. I might find that whichever one it's in, uh, okay, back this one, um, maybe all 50 aliens that are threatening your planet, maybe I decide that 50 is too high of a number. Maybe that fills up the screen too much. So maybe I reduce that to 25 or something like that. So I have to make sure that my rule book is honest and accurate to the finished product. So it's a good idea to write all this stuff out as you go. Gets it out of the way. This is one full component of the project, so it's going to be graded in and of itself. Um, but it's good to do this to also kind of reiterate to yourself what the rules are and what you're shooting for. Because remember, what we always talked about is that our game is meant to be something that is not just interesting and fun, but it serves our audience, so it serves the players. And so if we go back into our actual assignment for this, go into our classwork, and we go back into like the reflection piece, for example, one of the key questions in here, which I think is key to the whole thing, is was I thinking about how to make the game as enjoyable as possible for the player during this part of the process? So as you're writing your reflections, and certainly basing it off of this and your initial, these are your initial thoughts and your notes throughout your process, and you're comparing that to both the rules and the actual coding that you do, you're going to be reflecting on that. And one of the things that's always important is to think about your player first and last. So every choice you make needs to support that character's experience, not the character, the player's experience. You begin with the end in mind, and you also end with the end in mind. The first thought should always be the player. And when you are done with a certain section of your process, you have to always look back and say, okay, did what I try serve my client, or not client, but the player? Um, so you want to make sure that everything you do is serving that purpose. Um, and so that also goes with, did I do my best, or did I just do enough to get by? We've talked about this one before too, that even writing the rule book, did I just kind of put it as much in there as I had to, or did I go the extra mile to make sure it's all clear? Did I just slap some text on the screen and call it a day, or did I go in and I made sure that, okay, there's enough contrast here so I can read the text against the background? Is everything formatted properly? Are my margins good? Did I use um, bold, italic, underline colors and spacing and all that stuff appropriately, so that my players can really understand and get the most out of the process? So you have to ask yourself all those questions to make sure that what you're doing is your best work. um, if you're just kind of skating through or trying to get something down just to get it finished, you're going to miss stuff. And you need to make sure that you're always putting everything into the player experience, and make sure that what you're doing is serving that ultimate goal. So with that, that is my all encompassing, rule book explanation. But one of the things that I want you to do this week, even though there are no specific assignments on top of the final project, the final project is your assignment. If you have not yet done any thought about your project yet, certainly come up with your idea, develop a mood board, and get started on getting this rule book put together. I think those are some good spots to start. And then, of course, once you're ready, get into the actual game development. So whether it's in Scratch, and you're doing coding, or if you're doing a board game or a card game, get to working on the artwork for those and developing how that all works. But you can't do that until you have a plan set up and you have a sense for how the game is going to be played, because then you won't know, what pieces need to be created, what type of look and feel you're going for, what elements you need to search for and find inspiration on, all of that stuff. So follow this process. Start with the idea, the mood board, and your overall design document, your development document, and start there and see what you can do with that. I'm not putting in necessarily that you should have anything turned in, by any date except for the 12th. But I would suggest strongly that you work on things piece by piece and turn them in as they get done. So, for example, we have, we know the personal reflection is going to be something you do last, even after you turn in the game. You can't do the play testing until you do the development. So really, the mood board, rules and instructions, and the development process are the ones that you could really start on now. And your mood board could be something that you can turn in right away. And the rule book, even like you just saw, we worked on this for about a half hour. I'd probably spend some more time getting it, looking better, but it shouldn't take you too long to get through the rule book. And certainly, even after you turn it in, you can unsubmit or update the file so that any changes, like number of aliens or whatever your game involves, you can make those changes to make it all fit and be accurate once again.